Okay, so before we get started, I would recommend that you go to the video description, and at the end of the description, there should be a link to this GitHub page. I generally design these exercises as things we can walk through together through the video and the documentation. So go ahead and grab a link to it. So this is part 3 of the series of deploying Active Directory in the cloud. And what we're going to do is do a complete end-to-end solution using the Google Microsoft AD platform as a service offering and spin it up and then connect a couple of VMs to it and demonstrate how you would configure users and groups and connect Linux instances. And so we're going to be using the Microsoft Managed Microsoft AD, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to configure the network when required. Now, networking seems to be pretty simple in GCP, and so there's not a lot to it. We defined one network that we need to use, and then Microsoft AD does its own hidden network. So once we have our networking, which is going to be a simple subnet and VPC, we will deploy the Microsoft Managed AD. That is very also relatively simple compared to the other ones. It takes about the same time as it takes in Amazon, 30 to 60 minutes to deploy it. And once we do that, we're going to create two VMs, one a Windows server and a Linux server. Now on the Windows server, when it boots up, it joins the instance to the domain that we created, and then it also creates 4 users and 4 groups. And we create POSIX compliant groups. We'll talk about what that means, the UID number, GID numbers that have to be set. And then that sets up those users to be presented as Linux users. And so we spin up a second server, which is a Linux server, and it's going to use SSSD to authenticate to AD and present those users, those POSIX compliant users that we created, properly within Active Directory. We also enable password-based SSH, so you can also use those users that we create and authenticate with SSH to that Linux directory using the Git command line. Now, we integrate with Google Secret Manager, so when we create those 4 users and groups and the join password as well, we store all those credentials inside of the secret manager. So what we'll do in this is once we spin up these instances, those randomized passwords will go into secrets manager, pick them, copy and paste them, and use that to log into the instances that we've created. So we'll also manage directory objects. You do have to create a top-level OU. There are some protections for the Google Managed AD that it doesn't allow you to see or delete modify certain OUs within the system, which is a little bit different than AWS. AWS allows you to change anything. So in that respect, GCP is a little bit similar to Azure in that there's some controls placed on the Active Directory to make sure that you don't, screw things up like deleting the admin join users, things like that. And then at the end of the process, what we're going to do is clean up all our resources, be good stewards of our cloud environments. This is particularly important for these directory AD exercises because even the most generic instances will run you several $100s a month if you keep it up and running. So, unless you need it, you probably should destroy it after you're done with it. Okay, so let's take a look at the architecture diagram. And again, everything in GCP seems to be easier. And this is another case where it is quite a bit easier than the other platforms. So the first thing is when we spin up our domain controller or our Active Directory instance, we give it a CIDR block. That's all we give it. And so what happens underneath the covers is GCP creates this hidden VPC and deploys your domain controllers in it, which is kind of smart because you could screw up the networking, you could screw up the firewall rules. There's all sorts of services that have to be exposed, and by putting in its own hidden VPC, it really locks it down from you being able to screw things up. So this is pretty cool, but it's this sort of hidden VPC, and once you understand it, it's pretty straightforward. So the next thing you do is you create your VPC, and in that VPC, there's something called authorized VPCs to your Active Directories, and what that does is 2 things. It creates this peering relationship between your Active Directory or your VPC with the Active Directory hidden VPC. So all the networking routing is handled for you. It also injects the domain controller DNS entries into your Active Directory, into your other VPC, so that it automatically, when it tries to do an NS lookup on mcloud.mycloud.com, it'll find it within this VPC. So that's pretty cool. The other ones, you actually have to do some configuration. You have to create a DHCP option set or set the DNS servers on the VPCs or the virtual network within Azure. Here it's all done for you. You just say this network is authorized to use Active Directory, and it glues up all the services for you. And then finally, we create the credential secrets. So we use AWS Secrets Manager, and that's what we use when Windows starts up. That's where it's going to store those credentials that we create with the 4 users and groups. And then when we join the Linux instance, it's going to pull the join credentials out of the credentials, out of the secrets, and use it that way. Okay, so let's talk about prerequisites. Now, if you've never done one of our videos before, there is a video out there called GCP and Terraform Easy Setup. That's going to go through the basics with a very simple example. So if you're struggling with getting it configured the first time, you might want to try that video. But essentially, you've got 3 requirements. You've got to have a Google Cloud account, obviously, gcloud CLI installed, and a latest Terraform. So I'm assuming at this point you have all this stuff defined, and so now we're ready to start building the solution. So what you need to do is copy this, and let's go to our Ubuntu development environment. Let's paste that in. Now, in all our projects, we've got this script called checkenv. So let's do checkenv. And it's going to go, hey, you don't have credentials JSON. Now, this is the file that allows you to log in. You get it out of GCP. The video and the setup walks you through it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to click on my directory, and I'm going to upload from my laptop the credentials. All right, so now we should be able to do checkenv. And it says, all right, you're good. Now, the other thing that you need to do is there's a set of APIs you have to enable, and there's a script that I have, and I do API setup, and it will go and enable all the APIs that you need. I've already run this. If you run it the first time, you may have to wait 5 minutes or so for those APIs to be active, but that's all you need to do the API setup. Okay, so at this point, I think we're ready to do the apply. So let's do apply.sh. And it's going to get going. So while it's doing this, let's go back to the documentation, and let's talk about this build. There's really two phases to the build. The first phase is to build that networking and then deploy the managed Active Directory instance, which creates that hidden VPC that you got to connect to, or that it will connect to with your VPC. This phase takes 20 to 40 minutes to complete. I've actually seen it take a little bit longer. It seems initially I thought GCP was faster than AWS, but I'm seeing about the same times. It's never longer than an hour, whereas Azure is almost always longer than an hour. So it's AWS and GCP, the build time for the managed Active Directory is about the same. Then once that's done, we create a Linux and Windows VM. And they have startup scripts, and those startup scripts for the Windows one, of course, joins to Active Directory, and then it also creates those 4 POSIX compliant users and groups. And then the Linux instance starts up, and it uses SSD, gets the join credentials out of the secrets manager, and joins that Linux instance also to the domain. So at this point, I think we're ready to wait for the build to finish. Okay, the build has finished. It took about 45 minutes to build everything. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what everything got built in the console. So I'm going to bring up a web browser into the GCP console area. And so what I'm going to search for, and it's actually a little bit difficult to find the Active Directory, because if you put Active Directory in here, it doesn't show you. So what you want to do is say managed and that'll bring up Manage Microsoft AD. So we'll click on that, and this will show you the Cloud instance. It's in US Central 1. The NetBIOS name is mcloud, which is chosen from the fully qualified domain name. If we click on that, you'll see that it's authorized in the AD VPC. This is my project. This is the CIDR block, which creates that special hidden VPC that gets paired with your network. And then the password is setupAdmin. So that is it for the domain. It's very basic. This was the easiest to set up of all the managed Active Directories. It was, a couple lines of Terraform code, and Bob's your uncle. It's done. So we've got that. So now let's look at the VM instances. So there's two VMs that we get created. The Windows one, that's the one that ran that boot script that joined to Active Directory, but it also created those 4 users and groups that are POSIX compliant. They follow an RFC from the 90s, and UID number, GID number is set on every entity that needs to be presented on the Linux side. So that's it for the Windows instance. It joins and then adds those users. And then we have the Linux instance. It boots up. It grabs all the credentials from Secrets Manager, joins to Active Directory, and presents all those POSIX compliance users in the appropriate way on the system. So let's look at let's already I need to talk about the Secrets Manager. So if you go and do I guess I have it up here, Secrets Manager. At the top you would do Secrets Manager, and then you'd get it. And so the first admin credentials are the join credentials. So if I view your secret, and you'll see it gives you the credentials. And same thing with all the 4 user accounts that we create inside Active Directory. Now, there's a little trick here, is in the JSON it shows this // and for both the user ID and the password, and you have to get rid of the slashes. So that'll be one thing, that if you happen to get a password with // in it, you're going to want to actually copy that somewhere and just reduce that // to just 1, since that's the escape for a slash. So what we're going to do is take these credentials and log in to the Windows instance. And so I'm going to go over here, and I'm on the Windows instance, and I'm going to copy the external IP address, and then I'm going to bring up, okay, so you bring up the remote desktop connection, you put the public IP address into the connection, and I've already set mcloud setup, and what you need to do is go back to your thing, and here we have //, so I have it over on a file here. I've changed it to a single slash, so let's go back to this guy here, hit OK, and you're going to log in to the remote desktop. Now the first thing that would happen is it's going to bring up the server manager, and that tells you that this setup admin is, in addition to being a domain admin, it's also a local server admin, so this is the local server admin box. Now, another thing that we did when we booted the server is we installed the Active Directory administrative tools components. So I can go into the Start menu, go to Administrative Tools, and then I'm going to select Active Directory Users and Groups. So this is going to show you the Active Directory instance that was created by Google. It is a little bit more like the Azure instance, because there's some OUs in here where I cannot set things. It's like the setup admin and stuff like that. I have to put it in a particular OU. I think I created the users OU, and within that users OU, there's those 4 users and groups that we created that are POSIX compliant. You also have the computers, so the both instances that were joined to Active Directory show as joined as with computer objects, so that looks successful. So let's go to users, and I want to turn on advanced features. It's already turned on, but I want to turn that on because I want to see the different GID, UID numbers. So we go into here, and we have GID number of 10,001. Now I usually pick a GID number, UID number after 10,000. I run into trouble sometimes with, I guess an Amazon SSM user was 1,000, so I always start my UID, GID numbers at 10,000. Now these numbers, the way you specify them was created by a specification from the 1990s on how to do POSIX compliance, and essentially your GID number, UID number um, corresponds to the Linux user number and group number, and it's just synchronizing on these numbers within Active Directory. So that's it for the users. Of course, the members, you've got I chose some. I guess this is India, some generic Indian names, and I could go in and I could add, add and remove items. So this is my identity provider for my Linux server. So let's close that and let's bring up a Kumar. I met Kumar. And again, if you go to the attribute editor, you will see GID number is 10,001, so that's the default group, and then your UID number is 10,004. Now, if these numbers are not set, if you have a user and it doesn't set GID number, UID number, Linux treats it as if they don't exist. It won't even be loaded into the identity provider on the Linux side. Now, there are some methods for using like LDAP, SID mapping. I generally don't recommend using them. The SID number can change. It makes it so you're highly dependent on a deployment, because if you deploy another Active Directory, all your SID numbers would change, and if anything on the system, like the file systems, would store the wrong POSIX groups. So the best practice is to set these UID, GID numbers explicitly on your users and groups within Active Directory, and then they present properly on the Linux side. There's another tool called Centrify that does sort of the same thing. SSD is free, and it works pretty well. One of the things that Centrify does is it gives you the ability to map those GID numbers. It has like an extension into the management console that allows you to do this a little bit better, where actually it will calculate the next GID number, UID number for you. I do it usually in scripts for that. So that's pretty much it for the Windows server. It's joined. This becomes sort of your Active Directory admin box, if you will. Usually you have one of those. And so now we're going to start looking at the Linux side. So on the Linux side, I'm going to use MOBA extern. And so I'm going to go into here and I'm going to copy the Linux IP address. And I'm going to bring up Actor MOBA and say new session and SSH, and I'm going to say that, and I'm going to log in as J. Smith. Now, let me get it situated here, because I need to go back to my secrets manager and say, what is J. Smith's password, John Smith's password? And I'll sit there and say view secret. Now, in the case of the username, you don't actually have to put mcloud with the Linux server. You can just use the short name. And so let me copy that rather obtuse password. And you got to be careful, because if you skip one character, it will. So let's go back to here and let's hit OK. Alright, took a minute, but now I'm in. And so if I do who am I, it's going to say John Smith. If I do ID, it's going to give you those UID, GID numbers that we looked at earlier. Let me make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. So it's going to do clear ID. Alright, so we got those information. So I could say get into group mcloud users, and it'll give you all the instances. I could do that for any of them. So let's look at Linux admins. Alright, so I am an admin, apparently. So I should be able to do sudo bash. And who am I? I'm root. And so I guess the two things that I look at on the Linux side, if you go to etc SSD, you'll see this is the connection information into Active Directory using SSD. So it's fairly generic. So that's it for the SSD configuration, and that all happens in the boot script. The other thing too is sudoers. Actually, I guess I got one more. And we look at 10 Linux admins, and that is what controls the fact that I'm in that Linux admins group. It gives me. This is sort of like the remote desktop settings. I guess that's the thing I didn't show you on Windows that I could go back and do. But at this point, I can log in as any of those users with SSH. And let's see here. Let's list all the user attributes. Got me, of course. You got Raj Patel. We got Emily Davis, E. Davis. And then ID Amit Kumar. And you can see all those numbers match what we showed in the documentation. So that's the Linux thing. I guess the thing that I missed talking about is how you get the default password for the Windows. So if you go back to Windows, the only thing that I'm going to show you is if you look at here and say properties, and we look at not rename this PC, that's remote. That's right. Let's say select users. You can see mcloud users is what has been specified. So we set that in the actual boot script. We say, hey, use mcloud users. So any of those users, mcloud users, can log in. So Raj Patel, E. Davis, Ukumar, they can all remote desktop to the server and log in. So that's how we've configured that. So let's talk about that initial password. We're in setup admin. And let me go back to the documentation. And the way it works is it's not as easy as AWS. AWS, you just put it in the Terraform and you're done. With the GCP managed thing, the user ID is setup admin, and then you either have to go to the console or use this command to get the new password. And so what I do in the build is, after I create the instance, I call this in a script, retrieve the results, and put it in secrets. So effectively, it's like it's in the Terraform, like it is in AWS, but you just had to do a little bit of glue between the two different phases. So if you look in the apply sh, which shows the build, you'll see a little bit of bash code in between that calls this, gets the value, and then sets them in credentials. Alright, so we covered the users and groups, kind of showed them. Okay, so I believe I've covered this, and we've logged into the Linux instance and shown that. You can also get in through the SSH browser within the console. So in here I can go in and say, hey, open in browser window, and it will open an instance into that. Authorize. And you get this for free in GCP. You don't have to set up bash or anything. It just kind of works. But this should have the same A, Kumar, all the things that we looked at before. So that's another way of validating the server, is to use it in there. So I believe at this point, the only thing left to do is to be a good steward of our cloud account and run destroy. Now this is particularly important with GCP, because it is expensive. So if I go in here and say edit, I believe it shows me how much it costs. Yeah, $292 a month just for the most basic cloud. So you wanna delete that. So I'm gonna hit the destroy. Actually, I'm still logged in on that one. So let me exit here, and let me go back to the original and let me destroy.sh. Alright, now let's go to the GCP specific things. By far, GCP is the easiest to deploy, just about with everything, and that held for for deploying Active Directory. The Terraform is simple. It builds about the same speed as AWS. Even the hidden VPC thing that's there, how you give it a CIDR block and then it peers the authorized networks, all kind of works pretty well once you understand it. The other thing is that initial password is a little funky. You have to go and use that gcloud command. You can't just set it in the Terraform. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, the other ones I spent a lot of time on, and the GCP one it was just like that. It was very easy to work with. That seems to be the theme with GCP is they make the stuff as easy as possible. Um, so that's it for the GCP variant.